Welcome back to our webinar series, exploring the what, the why, and mostly the how of competency-based learning. This is session 2, and I am Dr. Karin Hess. I'm sharing the contents of a book that I collaborated on with Rose Colby and Daniel Joseph, who I introduced to you in session 1. Their information is there should you want to contact them or me. This series focuses on the history and the components of CBE. And in session 1, you were given some homework to begin to develop a profile of the graduate of your school. Today, we're going to focus on applying depth of knowledge to look at rigorous and deep learning for students. We're going to make connections between standards-based and competency-based systems, because if you've already begun to move into a standards-based system, you'll see some similarities, but also some differences. And I'll provide some tools and some examples so you can begin to think about what are our academic competencies and what are the personal skills we want our students to develop. The following sessions that come after this session, we'll be looking at classroom culture, pacing of learning, building assessments, and grading reporting practices. If you did your homework, and I was a former teacher, so I want to check to see if you did your homework. If you've been working on your profile of the graduate, here's a nice little checklist that you can download, but the whole thing is right there. These are some characteristics of a well-written profile of a graduate. I'd like to point out a couple of things they suggest when you're developing your profile. Don't have 75 categories, have 7 or fewer. Does it fit on one page so people will read it and see it? Is it visually appealing? Have you actually defined what those qualities are? Don't just say they're critical thinkers. Elaborate a little bit and say what a critical thinker can do, for example. This is just a nice checklist. This group does offer workshops, but if you work together and get feedback from parents and students, I think this is a pretty good guide. Why are we doing that first? Because now we're going to talk about, so what are your competencies that will help to elicit these kinds of goals you have for all students. So now we'll begin session 2, which is the first part of the how. How do you design rigorous learning goals, also called competencies, using depth of knowledge? You saw this visual in the last session. We're going to focus on teaching and learning shifts, the academic and the personal skills competencies. Returning to that definition, we're really focusing on number 7 here. How do you develop common expectations that are rigorous, explicit, and transparent? And when we start to think about assessing them, are they measurable? And can kids transfer these skills to other situations? I've highlighted the first 2 core components, the academic competencies, which are usually your course-based competencies, but sometimes we embed some personal skills within that. For example, if we're going to have students work on a project, maybe it's a social studies project where they have to work together. So the personal success skills they might be using is collaboration along with developing their knowledge of the content for the project. Personal skills, if you go back and look at what you put into your profile of the graduate, you would be saying, well, are we articulating what those skills are that we want every teacher to pay attention to? See, it's not okay to just tell everybody, hey, everybody in the school, think about this and do it sometimes. This is not about random acts of competencies. This is about common understanding and transparent competencies. So that's what we're going to focus on today. A little definition. Academic competencies are explicit, they're measurable, they're transferable. So if I teach you how to do something, a competency in math, let's say the competency is to learn how to use mathematical operations and analysis skills. You can transfer that to many situations. That, from what John Hattie would say, has an effect size of 0.86. And just to put this in context, if you know Hattie's work, Point 4 is an indicator of a year's growth of learning. So point 8 is if you have explicit, measurable learning objectives where the student is transferring their learning to new situations, then they are probably going to make more than that year's growth if it's done well. Doesn't happen by magic. Personal success skills competencies are not content specific. And what the research says, you need to teach these and assess these within the context of a content area. So we don't do collaboration on Thursday and goal setting on Tuesday. We say, where are there opportunities for critical thinking, for creative problem solving? And we build it into the complex learning tasks that we're giving kids. It can also include some of those skills of developing empathy for other people. A community service project might be a good example of that. So are they not only understanding what other people are going through, but are they acting on it? So if you have specific descriptions of the kinds of things you expect your students to do when they're working on a community service project, that would be a good example of a personal success skill competency that they can use in life. And how do we get at that? We get students to reflect on their learning. Now you notice the effect size isn't quite as high, but I will tell you that when I see teachers doing student self-reflection well, asking kids, what are you learning? Why are you doing it? Where can you use this next? They are going to solidify that learning because they have reflected on the learning. They didn't ask someone to give them a score on a test. They say, this is what I learned from this, doing this, participating in this activity. Very powerful. So looping back to the profile of the graduate, here's an opportunity to reflect. How do your personal success skills emerge from your profile of the graduate? And how might students integrate academic skills and knowledge with those dispositions or those personal success skills? So this is a good opportunity to just think about how could I as a teacher put these things together? How could I as a school administrator guide this work when I'm working with teachers or instructional coaches? How could I help teachers see the connections? So this is a good opportunity to stop and do some reflecting. If you have the book, these reflection pieces are all right from the book, so you could actually write in the book. We decided we wanted the book to be like a handbook, a personalized handbook. So what are rigorous learning expectations? What are competencies? And again, the Hattie effect size, which is actually the highest for teachers, is teachers being clear on what the expectations are. The effect size is 0.75. That's pretty darn high. And within a school, if everybody's clear on the same expectations, you will have more consistency in the learning opportunities kids have. So imagine for a moment, you and your colleagues have agreed to do peer coaching. You want to get some feedback, you want to give feedback to each other because you've been working on increasing rigor in your lessons. So think for a minute, what are 2 things you'd be looking for? And talk with someone else about what those things might be. And this might be a place where you want to pause and have a brief conversation about the things you might look for, because you're probably not all looking for the same thing. That's been my experience in working with school staffs. Everybody doesn't have the same idea of what rigor looks like in a classroom. After you've had a few minutes to jot down and share your rigor look-fors when you're peer coaching, you might want to watch this short video of me where I'm doing a similar activity with a group of teachers from Utah, and they are sharing at their tables what they came up with. And then I'm making some connections to the research about increased rigor. This video is about an 8-minute video, but it hits on the most important pieces that we should be focusing on when we increase rigor, and that would be connected to our expectations for learning. So I'll give you a chance to watch this video now and then come back to this session.
So before we begin, I'd like you to take 2 to 3 minutes to jot down a couple of words or phrases that come to mind when you think of cognitive rigor as it relates to teaching, instruction, learning, or assessment. What immediately comes to mind? And what I'd like you to do now is share at your tables and listen for what's the same on all of your lists and what's different. Let's hear some of the things that people agreed with at your table. When I ask you, I'm going to give you a mic just so everybody can hear in the room. So let's start with this table right here. Something you all agreed on. Who wants to be the spokesperson? Thank you.
So all of us agreed that to have cognitive rigor in anything that we ask the students to do, it's going to definitely take a lot of time, not only on teacher prep to get them there, but also student involvement.
Okay, time is always one of the first things that comes up on the list, because to do anything well, you have to allow the time. And that's when people get stressed out because they say, but I have so much to cover, right? How about something from this table? You willing to share? Thank you.
Yeah, we all agreed that we need to be able to transfer that information, cross-curricular transfer, so they're not just using that in one subject, they're using it in others and they're taking it deeper.
Great. Transfer almost always comes up in these discussions. And I like to use the metaphor that I heard many, many years ago, Grant Wiggins shared in a workshop. He said, coming to school is like being on the team. You get to come to practice every day and do the drills, but you don't get to play very many games. When you play the game, that's transfer. That's when you figure out when to dribble, when to pass, when to shoot, when is it going to work in a game situation. You're making decisions on your feet. As a matter of fact, he used to tell a very funny story about coaching his daughter's soccer team when she was in middle school. And he said he's standing on the sidelines and they're not doing anything that they did in practice. And he's yelling to one of the players, he says, Stephanie, look for the open man, give and go like we did in practice. And she turns around and puts her hands on her hips and says, they're not lining up like they did in practice. Right? Sometimes we're not giving them opportunities to transfer before they get to the game at the end. So in between the drills and the game are the scrimmages, right? How's a scrimmage different from a game? How is a scrimmage different?
A lot of coaching interaction.
There's coaching interaction. You can stop and say, what just happened here? Let's look at where everybody is. What could we do next? You just sort of do a think aloud in the moment. How else is a scrimmage different? It might be scripted. You have a certain plan, something you want to accomplish. You were going to say something as well?
They're playing against their own players.
They're playing against their own players, okay? It's not a real game. It doesn't count. There's no score. It's formative assessment, right? The best kind of formative assessment is when you start to put the skills together and practice it. So I like to challenge teachers to look at a unit plan and say, where are my drills? Where are my games? And where are the scrimmages? Because if you don't have any scrimmages, they're not ready for the game. Often the scrimmages have a lot of scaffolding to prepare them for the game. So we'll kind of continue to come back to that idea of what kind of scaffolding helps kids to practice integrating those skills. How about another example? How about from this table? Something you all agreed on? She's saying, do I have to take the mic?
We talked about how there needs to be proof in their logic and engagement, asking why.
Okay, say a little bit more about proof. What did you mean by that?
Well, I can.
You have a whole table here, so they can help you.
We want to add to that. I would say proof in their logic is just being able to use some examples and use different resources to come together with their ideas, how they came up with those ideas. and showing some evidence of their thinking.
Okay, so evidence of thinking changes by content area, right?